Hello and welcome. We're back. Episode 2 of Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Bit of housekeeping before we start. We are now on Twitter at WRebooked, or you can just use the hashtag Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler and Andeve. Andeve, how you doing?
Yep, not too bad, not too bad. Money in the Bank, obviously, not too far in the review mirror.
Absolutely. So, coming up on today's show, we will go through our review of Money in the Bank, the recent WWE pay-per-view. We will have our finger on the pulse, at least we hope, with some interesting conversation around ratings and the influence of wrestlers in 2020 getting involved in other industry. And we'll be going through a review of Dark Side of the Ring, the non-WWE documentary that has recently been airing and causing a bit of a stir amongst wrestling heads. So, without further ado, Money in the Bank has happened within the last couple of weeks. Big WWE pay-per-view, which centers around the main event of getting an title opportunity in both the men and the women's. And Dave, what do you think?
A pretty decent pay-per-view, to be honest. I think in the long run, probably better than WrestleMania. Actually, in terms of enjoyable, just sitting there watching it, I thought it was a better pay-per-view. King of the Ring actually is, sorry, not King of the Ring, Money in the Bank, the new King of the Ring, actually is a very decent pay-per-view over the years. It essentially is the new King of the Ring in terms of booking new stars. So it's always felt like one of the big five, and maybe it's actually now bigger than Survivor Series. So I understand then why WWE has put so much emphasis into it, why it draws a crowd. And for me, yeah, it was a quite a good PPV.
Okay, good. Well, let's go through the matches then, shall we? So kicked off with the Fatal 4-Way for the tag matches. We had the New Day, Miz and Morrison, the Lucha House Party, and the Forgotten Sons. What do you think?
Pretty enjoyable. Lot of carnage in there. Pretty fast paced. Felt like a really, really good way to kick off the show. I think that the quality of the match in terms of the gimmick and stuff as well sort of worked with the four teams taking in quite quickly. New Day, they've been around, and you expect good performances from them. You get good performances from them. Miz and Morrison as well, both veterans. I know Morrison's only recently back, but if they're in the match, then it's going to be a quality match. And I thought the Lucha Boys did a good job in there, and the Unforgotten Sons. So a very, very good way to kick off the show. And I certainly sat there thinking, okay, yeah, this sets a good precedent for the rest of the night. It was a good match for me. How about you?
I think those matches should always be a good start to the show. And if you're sat down and creative, going through the possibilities of what match are you going to open up with for an event like that, then that one is probably your choice. However, I just think that the format is a little bit tired of having multiple team tag matches. And okay, you get a decent paced match, which is what you want maybe for a first match. But for the talent involved, it was just a little bit rushed. There wasn't really much storyline coming in, and you couldn't really follow any kind of narrative to it. I'm guessing you disagree.
I'm not going to say it's the best tag match I've ever seen or anything like that, but I just think for a show opener, when you want something to warm up, especially when WWE has been a bit limp of late, I thought it was a good start. I enjoyed a few good spots, a few good moves, Spanish fly in there. For me, it was a good opener, a good pay-per-view opener.
Yeah, I think on the subject of rebooking, though, I think you've got the Forgotten Sons in there who came up to the roster 2 weeks ago. Little exposure to SmackDown until then. Okay, I know they've been doing a bit in NXT. Why not just build them from a starting point that they are and just gradually build up and create them as a bit of a force? There's 3 of them, so that they have a kind of uniqueness to some degree. And just let them just gradually work their way into a feud or work their way into a storyline. So just take them out straight away of the match. They don't need to be in a PPV that big opening from the get-go. Lucha House Party, okay, they've got their niche, they've got their spots that they can pull off that probably not many other talent on the roster can do, but they have zero momentum and aren't really seen by anyone as legitimate title contenders. So why not just have that match as the New Day, who have delivered countless good matches over the years now, two decent athletes in Big E and Kofi, just going at it with Miz and Morrison, who I agree have been fantastic value over the last however many months Morrison's been back in the WWE. And that would have been a great show-up, no, just a classic tag match with four guys telling the story. Thoughts?
Yeah, I get on board with that. I guess the match in and of itself, for what it was, I rate it, but I probably agree with you that if you just put New Day and Miz and Morrison into that match, then it's probably a better match. And there probably is a lack of build-up. Has to try and get these stars on the card. So, as it's done in the past, chucking a few tag teams together and into the match makes sense. But I suppose why the Forgotten Sons and why not Ricochet or whoever else is knocking around. But yeah, I'll buy that then. I'll concede. Maybe if I'm rebooking that, just have Miz and Morrison. Yeah, fine.
All right. So second match was Bobby Lashley. Always draws a conversation. People have always got something to say about our Bob. Bit of a crossover appeal. So he's turned up in a match with R-Truth and MVP.
I'd forgotten this match even happened, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was a bit weird in the way that it was set up. And I did wonder why MVP and R-Truth were kicking around together. And then obviously Bobby Lashley's invaded and he's obviously going to turn up with MVP. I think it's a good use of Lashley. He got a good ovation when he came back and he did well actually in leaving WWE. And as you mentioned, a crossover star. Potentially it wouldn't be, but someone you could arguably legitimately put up against Lesnar and go on. That obviously is what you want when you're booking wrestling. It's just a shame that to get Lashley over, they sort of have to bury that ridiculous angle he was in with Lana and Rusev, which has just now disappeared. Obviously, Rusev literally disappeared. But I guess moving forward, that's a decent way to book Lashley. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think they're starting to get things right with him. Only now, though, and how long's he been back? It's taking some time to get over one ridiculous angle after another until you actually turn around and go, right, this guy has an incredible look. He's got an incredible background. He doesn't really need to say much, so you could stick him in with MVP as a mouthpiece and run with it.
You're definitely right about his booking, actually. That Lana Rusev, because especially as he's this massive dominating figure, someone you think Vince would be able to get behind and someone who oozes credibility as soon as they step out. I know he's not a great talker, but he has the physique, he has the tools. And if you think about his booking, it's been absolutely terrible in terms of back to that story with Sami Zayn and the sisters. That was pathetic. So yeah, they are getting it right with him by just going back to basics, really. It was all right. I forgot it was on the cards. Hopefully that develops going forward as a decent story.
You just wonder if it's a case of Lashley that there isn't really anyone else left that they regularly got on TV within the last couple of months.
But it's up to those superstars to grab that brass ring, as Vince would say.
Maybe we should push the podcast their way. Right, next match, we had the SmackDown Women's title match between Bayley and Tamina with Sasha in Bayley's corner and heavily involved. Women's match, Andeve.
Yeah, it was all right. Tamina's looking as good as she can look. Bayley is actually doing really well. I think SmackDown this week, she was going toe-to-toe with Charlotte and a few verbals, and actually that was excellent. So I think Bayley's done really well since she's turned heel, and I think she's really embracing the role. So I thought she got as good a match out of that as she could. Sasha Bayley ongoing story and surely coming explosion. I would say that although the little looks and glances they give each other, it's okay. I do like the slow burn of the storyline. I would like a little bit more to it. It feels very, very slow, almost like they're trying to evolve it over years and years rather than weeks and months. How did you find the match?
Yeah, so just picking up on the Sasha Bayley stuff, I think we talked about that in episode 1, didn't we? Which, if you haven't heard, you might as well go back and listen to. I still like it. I still like the way that it's going. The match itself, I think, go a step further from what you said. Bayley did well to get a match out of Tamina, but she carried it pretty well. Some of the spots which Tamina just doesn't really know how to land, doesn't look like she really knows how to bump. Ed Bailey was having to sort of super kick from off the floor to a great height. So I think she did well to carry that match in the way it did. And for the 10, 15 minutes that they had, it was pretty good. And obviously the right outcome as well.
Yeah, I do wonder, what do you think's going on with Banks, though? She's not wrestling or doing anything at the moment, really, is she?
Slow payoff, isn't it?
Yeah, but I just imagine that she could be at least involved in. I mean, how many matches has she had? She's involved in the number one contenders and stuff. But I just think that storyline, we're all waiting for it. It's not a lot else going on. It's just such a slow burner. It's almost not burning.
The convention is to have, if you compare it for a second to the Rawlins, Murphy, MOP stuff, they have on Raw, Murphy, for example, fighting McIntyre as part of like sort of fighting his battles for him, for the main guy. They haven't really had Sasha on SmackDown fighting for Bayley in other matches. It's happened once or twice, but it's not really been a feature. It's just a clear case of different booking team, different sort of style or creative.
Yeah. But it's a shame because for me, Sasha is second only to Charlotte really on the roster. So I get the storyline, I get turns or Bayley turns, whichever way it's going to go. But to have her not wrestling just at ringside, unless there's an injury, seems a bit of a waste to me.
Yeah, I would mostly agree. But I don't think it's a detriment to the storyline.
Fair enough.
So we're not really rebooking that too far, are we? Maybe a little bit more of a tease coming in.
Yeah.
Okay, so we then had the Bray Wyatt, Braun Strowman Universal title match. Where do we start?
I know it's not the best wrestling match of all time, but I actually really enjoyed it. It should probably be a bigger match. Given the backgrounds to those two wrestlers and their linked history. But I really like the way that Wyatt and The Fiend are different characters because it gives you much more longevity in terms of storyline and many more options because you can protect The Fiend with Wyatt losing. And they're certainly doing that much better than they did it with Finn Balor and the Demon, which never really made sense when he was literally for pay-per-views. So I think it works quite well. The rivalry is running quite hot. Wyatt is really hard to take your eyes off. He is just compelling viewing. I always thought he was actually when he was the head of the Wyatt family, but even more so now. He's fully embraced in the character, in the gimmick. And the end when Strowman got the mask, I was genuinely thinking, maybe that went on for a few seconds too long, but I was genuinely thinking, which way is he going to go here? Is he going to join back up with Wyatt? So probably the right result. Protected Wyatt, protected Strowman for the spectacle, albeit not the most fantastic wrestling match.
What do you think about the puppets getting involved?
Oh yeah, that's the only bit I thought was a bit stupid. The puppets are part of the Firefly House, whatever it's called. So keep them in that, keep them away from it. But it's a bit ridiculous when they're turning up at ringside, making comments and stuff. It just makes it a bit more trivial, a bit more stupid. And apparently they had to film that loads of different ways because Vince didn't want the puppets being orchestrated behind the scenes by their puppeteers. So no, that I couldn't enjoy. I would get rid of that from the match if I was rebooking it. Otherwise, I thought it was all right. Any changes you'll make, or what did you make of it?
Yeah, so interesting point you're saying about Wyatt sort of submerging himself in the character, in the gimmick, which is true, and he is. But I wonder if now it's got to the stage where creative think that he can just take a pin, a 3 count like he did in the match with Strowman and having previously done so in the match with Goldberg. So whilst he can keep coming back and he's clearly over and he is a fantastic worker, it's almost to his detriment that he has to keep losing matches.
That's true, although they did put the pin on Wyatt, who is a very different character. The Fiend, it's like you go through Wyatt to get to the Fiend. But I take the point. The Goldberg booking, that's just a legacy that's going to haunt them for a while.
Which again has been done to death. Okay.
I think actually just one more thing on that one. In terms of the storyline, obviously you've got Strowman and Wyatt and the connections there with them and the Wyatt family. Seems a bit of a shame that Harper and Rowan have left the company. I know this story, they probably happened by accident, but it seems they're leaving the company as they're about to have a massive role, which, if you're messing around with puppets at ringside, surely it'd be much better to have Harper and Rowan at ringside getting involved somehow. It'd be a really good storyline.
Or just anyone at ring size, like AEW have taken to.
Oh, what with the sort of semi crowd, a few people in the
it just
actually, and it is a bit better actually in terms of that. I think it must mean the wrestlers, well, it must be better to perform in front of 15 people than none, I assume, and it maybe up their game, and just it makes it feel a little bit less sanitized.
It just takes the edge off a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose from a wrestler's point of view, you go to the performance center compared to actually a few wrestlers around the ring shouting stuff, and actually just from a work colleague jovial point of view, it's probably better. So yeah, I think it'd be better to have some wrestlers around the ring, and if you could tie that into a decent storyline with the Wyatt family, then all the better. But for whatever reason, WWE isn't going down that route at the moment.
Just on a slight tangent, I really like the AEW set and production kind of the entranceway. I think it's just really well done compared to WWE. I don't know if you've seen it at all, but maybe that's one for another day. McIntyre and Rollins for the WWE title.
Yeah, good match for me. I'm tempted to say it's match of the year. I say that, and then I think about whether any other matches that I enjoyed as much or was involved in as much. Certainly not at WrestleMania. And so then I'm thinking the Royal Rumble. Actually, the match itself was fantastic. I don't know if you compare the Royal Rumble itself with that match, but for me, a match of the year so far candidate. I know I think they're telling a good story. I'm digging Rollins' new character. He's getting a bit of criticism, but I actually think it's really good. It's a twist on the Mr. Monday Night. This Monday Night Messiah. He's clearly not as a character. As his character's developing, he's clearly traversing a path of not quite sure what to do, and that comes across on the TV screen. The match itself, good spots, back and forth. Genuinely thought Rollins might win it at one point. And that Claymore finisher as well for McIntyre is just fantastic. McIntyre's doing well as champion. I think Rollins is developing his character well. I thought that was a really, really good match. Yourself?
Best match on the card. Not that was particularly difficult to achieve, but without doubt, best match on the card for most of the reasons you've already listed out. I would add to that, I'm quite enjoying Samoa Joe on the commentary. He has a different dimension that most of the other bland, dry others don't. And the gimmick itself that Rollins has submerged himself into, so that he then followed it up with on Raw the next night, has been excellent.
Yeah. I think
it's just such a shame that there's not a crowd there to really lap that up.
I think really, really good. And when we talk about, and we've been quite critical of a lack of character development, a lack of storyline, lack of narrative, actually, I've really enjoyed Rollins getting into this gimmick. It's a bit hindered by the fact that he's a Messiah with no followers, but it's not his fault. I don't think Jesus would have been able to help AOP, always injured. But I think he's moved nicely into the character. He looks good with Murphy, really intriguing to watch and interesting to watch. And I thought the handshake at the end of the match was interesting as well, because it's like Rollins doesn't quite know. I mean, he does know, but obviously the character of Rollins doesn't quite know which way he's going to go. And I actually really rate that.
So if we're rebooking anything in this match, it's probably two things for me. Not often you probably hear me say it, but I probably would have gone for a screwy ending just to keep the feud going. Maybe from a selfish standpoint, the two are clearly decent workers, are going to have good matches together. But rather than Rollins just eat a pin, thought they could have come up with some alternative ending that just prolonged the storyline, prolonged the feud. And to your point on the handshake, I think he kind of undermines a little bit what they're trying to create with Rollins. Clearly, he's a popular guy anyway and a good worker, and he has a lot of high-flying moves. So if you're going to try and portray him as a heel, the last thing you kind of want him doing is shaking hands with the top babyface. So I get where you're coming from, but we're rebooking this, so I'm not having Rollins shake his hand at the end. I'd rather him just smash him in the face and walk off, or just go up, give him a good look in the eye, and then just drop out the ring and walk off, more in line with his sort of Messiah persona than anything else.
Yeah, I'd still challenge that, I think, because I think his Messiah character is someone that's he's trying to find the light almost. And so actually shaking hands, he doesn't really want to shake hands, but he has shaken hands. Then he's on Raw the next day, catatonic. I do think you have you on something there in terms of him keep losing. I didn't think the pinfall was too bad, but I suppose he also off the back of a loss at WrestleMania. So how long does that streak continue? Maybe they build that into the storyline. I guess we'll have to see. But worked well, and I'm enjoying the Rollins character.
Yeah, I would mostly agree. And they followed it up well, sort of interweaving the Royal stuff with the Becky announcement, which I guess we'll come on to very shortly.
Yeah.
Right. So that just leaves us with the main event, the actual Money in the Bank ladder match itself, which this year, in light of everything that is going on, was taking place at WWE headquarters, Titan Towers. Another cinematic match from the bottom to the top of the building. You go for it.
I think I would give it a thumbs up. I think it would get to thumbs up for me. I would say it was more enjoyable than not enjoyable, if that's the yardstick we're measuring by now. It was better for me than the theatre matches or theatrical matches that happened at WrestleMania. There's actually some sort of wrestling and more interactions and moves that you associate with it. I'm not saying it was fantastic, and a few bits didn't land. I don't know why Stephanie was there on a green screen background when everyone else that was involved in the matches. There's a bit where they slipped on a wet floor, which just stupid. But I get I'm not the only demographic. So, I definitely don't think it was a brilliant match, a perfect match, and I much prefer the Money in the Bank matches from years before, all the way, dating back to the ones at WrestleMania. But for me, it was more, it was better. I liked the fact that they had AJ Styles referencing his match with The Undertaker, and a few decent spots in there. I suppose that once they got to the roof, why not have a little bit of wrestling on the roof? Actually 10 minutes up there doing some spots, and that would have been a good end, and change it from just thumbs up to actually a pretty decent thumbs up. So I'm positive on it overall, but the barometer for that it's not that high these days. Yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I think I'm coming from a standpoint of here comes another gimmick match, which by nature of the way it was promoted was always going to be overloaded with more gimmick than we care to talk about. So it was always onto a bit of a loser for me. But actually, I thought the presentation wasn't too bad. Certainly, if your comparison is the two cinematic matches at Mania. Yeah. So from that standpoint, okay, fine, it was better. But do you really enjoy a food fight, which was clearly built for Otis? Do you enjoy some of the creative team? Are they past or present? Sort of rolling around in scooters and people having food thrown in their face. I think it was a little bit insult to intelligence again. Maybe we're not the demographic that they're aiming the product at. But there's just so many ways they could have done that a lot better. Certainly in terms of like the interactions on the stairs and things, and they could have had more action actually in the ring at the top, as you say.
Yeah, that for me would be an obvious way they could have improved that match. I didn't mind those interactions. Again, they've got to try something different if they're pushing ahead. Don't get me wrong, ladder matches are my favourite matches. I loved all the Money in the Bank matches. I suppose if you're comparing it against other Money in the Bank matches and pay-per-views, it was a terrible failure. If you're comparing it in the current context with the Firefly House match and the Undertaker Boneyard match, I thought it was better than those. But lots of room for improvement, really. In that, yeah, I agree.
It's the Firefly Funhouse.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. What's your thoughts on Otis winning and his character generally?
I could see the positive in it. Corbin's already king of the ring and doing a beaten cat angle, so he's got exposure fairly just below main event level. You had Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles. Daniel Bryan's always going to be one of the big faces in the company. AJ Styles just off the back of a match with Undertaker. So I can see that actually, if you put the briefcase on Otis, you give it to him, chance him run around with it. It does put someone else into the picture, which is a positive. I don't know that he's ready or that his character's been developed enough. I wonder if he should actually still be in the tag team and relying on that. And I don't know if you can actually see him cashing that in on Strowman or McIntyre, which is what you're supposed to be able to do, and imagine him winning. So I was thinking about it in terms of Rikishi when he ran over Stone Cold. He was a decent mid-card, more over than Otis, and he just failed to sort of develop into the main event star that they wanted him to be. So I'm probably on the fence 50-50 and would be, let's see how it goes in the next 3 months, especially considering he's putting part of decent storylines and stuff. So I can see why they did it, but I'm tentative. Yourself?
Yeah, the best part about Money in the Bank is not necessarily the actual match itself, but the forthcoming programming thereafter, where you've got someone fresh off of that big win, potentially just throwing a curveball into every creative going forward, or at least every creative for that particular brand, whether it be Raw or SmackDown. And so they've gone with Otis, who I still think is, well, as you say, a mid-card, basically comedy character, who doesn't really pose any legitimate threat to the big guys. And I think the best they could do with it is just have him coming in on comedy, crazy angles where he tries to cash in on the women's tags or doesn't really conceptualize why he's got it. I think that's probably the best thing they could do with it, because anything else is just not really going to be believable.
It's interesting. I suppose you're seeing him as a comedy character. I suppose he's a comedy character. So the Money in the Bank becomes a comedy with him. I guess if they hold on, like Rollins held the title for best part of a year before he cashed in. I'm not saying Otis should cash in at WrestleMania or anything like that. But actually, if Otis holds on to it for a while, if he has a decent, continues decent feud, maybe Ziggler turns up and says, "Look, what are you doing with that Money in the Bank? Put it on the line against me." Then I think there's some positive that can come out of that there. I just think at the moment, aside from putting a new person into the limelight when they don't have that many people, because obviously the pandemic, I just wonder in the short term how they're going to book it. I think on SmackDown he was on it too much, and that was a problem.
Fair. I think the obvious choice, unfortunately, was thrown over the roof. So we never saw Aleister Black come again. But I think Aleister Black would have been a great shout for someone with like a lot of mystique around his character. You never quite know what he's thinking, what he's doing. He's got kind of dark side to him, and I think he's due a decent push. He's been around a while, waited his turn. I think he would have been a good contender to be the Money in the Bank guy.
Yeah, I actually forgot about him. So that's a really good shout. Obviously, over that roof, and then I completely forgot about him. I don't know if you what you thought about the next day in terms of Raw and that, but Mysterio's on Raw and he wasn't even selling it. Now, obviously, fair enough, he was coming back, and obviously we know they weren't actually thrown over the roof, never to return. So don't expect to turn up in ambulance the next day, all in plaster casts with crutches. But wrestling is about selling. They're selling punches in the ring. You're selling for the partner you're doing the dance with. You're selling in terms of storyline. They should be selling that going off the top of the roof much more than Mysterio did the next day, where he just turned up and had a wrestling match.
Not his fault, though, is it?
No, of course not. Of course not. The booking there, but although I did Ralph as well. Chucked himself off the building to show the wrestlers how he wanted it done. So maybe he should worry less about getting involved in the spots and more about thinking about the booking.
Which is what we're all about, isn't it? Rebooking.
Yeah.
Right. So, with that in mind, shall we move on?
The women's with Asuka.
Yeah, so the other side of the Money in the Bank.
Yeah, so obviously she won the Money in the Bank, but she also won the title, so I don't know if that means she has won the Money in the Bank or not. She's a good choice. Obviously, we're going to come on to Becky in a bit. I'm tempted to say she's been underutilized, underbooked, but actually there was a few graphics of what she's actually won in terms of Royal Rumble, all the last in the Survivor Series. She now won Money in the Bank. She won all 3 titles, tag titles, mixed match. So maybe actually that's just a perception issue, and she has been booked quite well. She's the obvious choice. Becky Lynch called her the best wrestler in the world, women's, I assume. Don't know if that's widely held or story or what, but to hold the title, and I'd be interested to see where she goes with it. Would you have had Asuka, or would you have had someone else?
Based on the field that they put out, yeah, I would have gone with Asuka too. I just wish they'd made a bit more of the Becky pregnancy storyline on Raw than following night.
You didn't enjoy that? I thought it was really good.
Well, obviously, it was great to see like the sort of kind of raw emotion of Becky. I mean, that was always good to see in any kind of wrestling environment. But why just not make a bit of a bigger storyline with it in terms of having a heel come out and cut her short or ruin her moment? I think they could have just cashed in a little bit there, if you pardon the pun.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I actually thought that was pretty good, but maybe that's a good time to hold our Money in the Bank analysis as we move on to the next couple of bits, which link quite nicely.
Absolutely. Should we move on?
Why not?
Okay, so part 2 of Wrestling Rebooked. As always, Andeve has got his finger on the pulse for our next section.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it before Becky was announced as pregnant and relinquishing the title, but I think WWE has a potential issue if they're not careful, and they just have to be a little bit careful how they're treating their stars. So obviously Vince and WWE want stars that transcend the business, because that's good for business, it's good for WWE. But if it doesn't look after its stars, there's a worry for me, because she is pregnant, even more so that these stars might be going off and not coming back and then harming the product. So I think there's a potential issue there.
Okay, yeah, so just for context, we've got Becky Lynch has recently made a cameo role in the TV show Billions, and there was talk of her potentially landing a Marvel role. Whether that's now been scuppered as she's pregnant, who knows. Roman Reigns has turned up in a Netflix documentary recently, Wrong Missy. The Big Show also had his own show, and of course there are many others that have preceded those who have gone and had illustrious careers. So yeah, I guess that does beg the question: is that the kind of thing that Vince wants to have his talent involved in to enhance the wider appeal and reach a wider audience, or actually is that the very thing that's harming his product and his company?
It's good for the superstars. It's good for WWE. You know, we've seen it with Hogan, you know, in the 80s all the way through to more recently. But, you know, take The Rock. It's the highest paid actor 2 of the last 3 years. I think 1 year, allegedly, he's earned more in that year than any actor's ever earned in a previous year. So these stars aren't just going to Hollywood and doing bit parts, but actually we're talking about him as the biggest movie star on the planet currently. And so wrestlers are looking at that thinking, well, I wonder if I could do a bit of that. And equally, who's the next Rock? And I was thinking that, you know, when I was hearing about Becky Lynch on Billions and the potential with the Marvel movie, and given that Rawlins is the father and also a wrestler, is she really going to come back and want to be on the road 200 plus days a year with a young child, especially with a husband, partner, husband, whatever, in the same industry? So I think that's the issue. And then I start thinking, well, you know, Rock is an anomaly, but actually, you know, there's quite a few that have succeeded in, as you mentioned, those just done really well. You wouldn't put him as a crossover movie star, but 4 Marvel films at least he's been in. You mentioned the Netflix, and you've got Big Show on Netflix, you've got Cena and Bumblebee and the new Fast and Furious, you've got Roman Reigns, like you said, who's already been in a couple of films. And then actually you could look at it from another context and bring in the fact that Lesnar's on a part-time schedule, because one of the reasons he left in 2002 because he didn't want to work all those dates. You got Punk happy to be sat on the sidelines, and you've got stuff like Total Billers actually during the time when everything else is crashing. So if you're these superstars and you know you can make a decent living elsewhere, and potentially, you know, you're being forced to work in this current climate, you start to think, well, Vince is out for himself, maybe I should be out for myself. And I think it's potentially a thin end of the wedge. I get what you're saying, and I agree that obviously good for the superstars is good for business. But when you look at all those superstars collectively in their slightly different contexts, working this hard, not because they're lazy, but because it's generally really grueling, when I have other options.
Yeah. Part of the issue is, of course, is that wrestling has so much crossover with acting and in the TV or film world anyway, doesn't it? Though, like the exposure is there to be on TV and get involved in a character. I mean, that's ultimately what wrestling is. So there's always going to be that crossover. I guess it's just much more apparent now, where there's more demand in terms of the TV appeal and also the entertainment aspects that wrestling has become. If you think about it historically compared to what wrestling was in the 80s, maybe even the 90s, wrestlers were wrestlers. There was more of a sporting appeal to it, whereas now, you know, we were talking about Wyatt earlier and the way he submerges himself into character. I mean, you can actually see him turning up and doing a decent job in the movie in that type of character.
Yeah, and I guess Becky Lynch talked in a promo about how she turned up in 2013. It's all she ever wanted to do. And of course, Cena's been well looked after for the company, and the company gives a lot to him and he gives a lot back. So, of course, Vince is going to encourage people to go and build themselves and come back. And of course, people are going to want to do that. But if he's not careful, and we've seen Sami Zayn stripped of the Intercontinental title, Reigns choosing not to work. Apparently, there's a bit of heat backstage with some of the wrestlers who've chosen not to work during this. If he is forcing the issue like that, I thought that they don't go and not come back, and that will be to the detriment of his product in the ring.
And I guess that's been reflected in the ratings.
Yeah, nice segue there. Yeah, ratings have been poor, haven't they?
So the second part of Finger on the Pulse, we wanted to just have a look at the ratings for Raw specifically. And there's been quite a bit on the dirt sheets that Raw within the last couple of weeks have recorded audiences of between 1.68 and 1.92 million. That's in the US. Compare that to a 2018 average of 2.8 million and a 2017 average of 3 million. And if we really want to go back a little bit, compare again to around the time of WrestleMania 15 in 1999, which peaked at around 8 million viewers of Monday Night Raw.
Blimey.
So it begs the question, why is no one watching?
Yeah, great question. What a shame if you're Drew McIntyre in your first title reign and doing a good job. I think it's important contextually that all shows, apparently, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, obviously we're looking at Raw as the flagship, but even AEW, Impact, across the different promotions, across the different shows, it's down everywhere. So obviously there's a common factor there in the pandemic, but actually they're down 20% in a year-on-year comparison, but they do go up. They went up after Money in the Bank and they went up after WrestleMania. So, you ask why no one's watching because they've got nothing else to watch, right? They're not watching the NBA or any football or anything. Well, I suppose it's America, but they're not watching NBA or NFL. So why aren't they watching Raw? And probably the answer is in part because, just generally without a crowd, it's not quite as interesting. But also, there's almost no reason to tune in. It's gone up when something has happened in terms of after WrestleMania, after Money in the Bank, because then those shows, you want to see what happens. And actually, this one after Money in the Bank with Lashley continuing his rehabilitation, Becky's announcement, Rollins being great in terms of his character, another match with McIntyre, Orton Edge at the end. I actually watched it thinking, this is well worth watching. This is actually good. So, you can only control what you can control, and what WWE isn't doing a good job of is controlling the booking and the creative story, and people tune in, and I think that's quite telling.
Yeah, I think it's probably 2 points for me. One is that the irony is certainly not lost that in light of the pandemic, Vince has been determined not to lose out on his TV deals to keep the product on TV. And in making that decision, viewers have plummeted. So there's certainly no irony lost there. So it's like, how do you actually turn that round and how do you rebook any of this stuff to actually get people to tune in? I think the first thing you probably have to do is look at who actually is watching this. Is it diehard fans? Is it people that are tuning in because they've got nothing better to do? Are people just looking for certain characters, certain storylines?
The ones they're after in terms of demographic is the 18 to 49. And I think diehard is a good way to describe it. Almost desperate. Almost like, please, I need something to watch. I want it to be good. Let me see if I can watch it. But I just think that that's, in terms of about rebooking, just put some decent matches on the card with some decent wrestlers and some decent storylines. And, it's not, I know Vince is on record as saying he doesn't actually mind whether everyone watches the shows all the way through, and that he sees WWE very much like the NFL, where you might have a favorite team and you watch their matches, but not, and then you watch your highlights. And height-wise, he's sort of keen on people watching, not necessarily watching the whole show, but following their wrestler's story or tuning in for aspects of the show. I think that's fine, but surely he doesn't want people just tuning in on YouTube, watching 5 minutes and going, oh, great, I've seen Raw. You can condense it into a 5-minute package.
Well, I guess that is how people consume now, though, isn't it? But also, surely contradicts what he wants. The man that's always been concerned and obsessed with the ratings, the very thing that obviously created the product that is today with the Monday Night Wars. And now he's starting going, well, it doesn't matter if you just watch a 5-minute clip on YouTube. I suppose there's a 20-year gap and things have changed. But
yeah, it doesn't. I don't know. I mean, surely for advertising and stuff, and with the networks and the amount they've bid you on your flagship ratings, and it's very similar to football clubs and things that, you know, it starts with what you're doing on the pitch, and then everything else comes off the back of that. And the WWE, the pitch is the ring, and if you're producing a good product there week in, week out, people will go to your house shows, people will sign up and buy merchandise and, you know, books and comics or whatever. But if he's not doing that effectively week in, week out, and he's just letting people tune into WWE.com to watch 5 minutes of stuff, then, you know, I think he's probably going in the wrong direction, although he's still making a lot of money.
That's what it comes down to for him, really, isn't it? He'll make money in spite of. Okay. Shall we move on? Part 3?
Yep, let's go for it.
Let's do it. Okay, so last but not least, part 3 of episode 2 of Wrestling Rebooked. It's time for our review. And this week we're going to look at the documentary that has aired recently in the UK and the US, Dark Side of the Ring. We're going to kick off just looking at season 1, conscious that season 2 has also aired. So 2 Canadian guys that have shot a documentary with an investigative / criminal style, looking at some specific WWE, or rather wrestling stories that have occurred through the course of time. And their main perspective, that they've gone on record as saying, is wanting to create a documentary that gave a humane and personal story of accounts that happened to certain wrestlers that may have passed, or certain wrestlers in certain events that have had a big impact on wrestlers or the business. What did you think, Andeve?
I watched it all in 2 days. So that probably tells you I thought it was really good. Interesting what you're saying there. I didn't realise I obviously knew it wasn't WWE who produced it. I didn't know who produced it or what their aim was. But it had a really, really different feel. I mean, obviously, the WWE network has so much stuff on there now, and it's fantastic to drop into and dip into any of it. But they're rewriting history and they're playing you, whereas this felt much more authentic. And I thought some of the stories are absolutely insane. It's interesting you say about the approach they took and what they wanted to uncover, because with a few of the episodes, they absolutely hit that nail on the head.
Any in particular caught your eye?
Yes, it's probably easy to get the other way. And the ones that didn't catch my eye, I thought the one about Elizabeth and Savage and the Fabulous Moolah, they were a little bit, they need to be a little bit more probing, sort of hinting at things, but I don't think they necessarily had the coverage or the evidence to really, really tease out what they were talking about there. Although, of course, Fabulous Moolah had a big impact in terms of changing the name of the Women's Battle Royal at WrestleMania. So then conversely, the ones I thought were really good, obviously there's Montreal Screwjob, which, you know, it's never not going to be interesting. But the best episode for me was the one about the Von Erichs, which, you know, I knew about the Von Erichs as a wrestling family. I didn't realise 5 of the 6 had died before their father, like through suicides and things. Really compelling story. It makes the Kennedy family look like they've had a good life. I knew about him as a hard-hitting wrestler. I didn't know anything else really. It's actually well worth anyone watching if they're into sort of true crime and enjoy watching those Netflix documentaries where they follow, you know, mysteries and stuff. Then for me, Bros of Brody was absolutely fantastic. I just sat there gobsmacked, thinking this can't be real life, can it? It was superb.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that sort of made these documentaries really interesting. One, the fact that it was a non-WWE produced show that were really just homing in on getting across the story of the people who was involved. And that in itself just sold the program with no agenda, no politics, no slant on anything. So, and that really came across. And to take your point about the Randy Savage story, Randy Savage and Elizabeth story, the guys that produced the show are on record as saying that they really wanted Hogan to take part and to give some insight into the show. But actually, when they turned up and had Hogan's wife, they got way more out of her than they probably ever would have got out of Hogan. And that probably rings true, because to make these series, let's assume that they're not going to have WWE as a corporation involved and Vince not involved. So they are relying on people to talk and give their account and stuff that might not compromise them with Vince in any way. So that in itself just makes it really interesting if you have any interest in wrestling. But to come back to your point about true crime in general, these stories are really interesting, aren't they? Like the way that the things are happening backstage, and there's people not understanding what kayfabe is and what a heel and a babyface is beyond wrestling, and then having to be portrayed in real life. Fascinating to watch in that period of time, which of course we didn't necessarily remember or live in. So you are kind of looking at it through the rear view.
Absolutely, and it also took a few things outside, especially the Bruiser Brody stuff. It was taking it outside of America, which was really, really interesting. And following the outcome of that with his death, the WWE then didn't go down and work in those countries for a while. So actually, I think who they appeal to. I think obviously if you're a wrestling fan, they're an absolute must, and they're a really good counterbalance to the WWE developed documentaries because of that unique perspective you talk about. But also, if you're just sort of semi-interested in wrestling and just enjoy the stuff that accompanies the wrestling, less about what's going on in the ring and stories around it and the interconnections and the way the wrestlers work and what life was on the road. Actually, that's referred to quite a lot in these documentaries, and you really get a picture of that. And actually, the abiding memory I have actually for continuity from that and Ruthless Aggression, which we talked about last time, was just how hard these wrestlers had to work. And actually, especially in the 80s and before with Fabrice Moolah, how much, talk about breaking kayfabe. There almost was no kayfabe. That if you were married, as Macho Man Elizabeth were, you were married you had to do everything together off screen. The way they kept the heels and the faces separate, all that sort of stuff is actually fascinating, alongside some really, really amazing stories that first series tells, which I think is all available on Vice TV, or I think you can get it on YouTube as well.
Vice TV is the production or the TV company that did it, but it is on YouTube too.
Yeah, it's well worth it. And the episodes aren't that long either, are they? About 40 minutes?
45 to 50, which once you start watching becomes a bad thing. You just kind of want it to go on, especially the Savage Elizabeth story, which, let's be honest, is savage. The way it turns out. But I would mostly agree. The one you've not mentioned there, the only one you've not mentioned is the Gino story. Again, that's episode 5. Without giving too many spoilers away, the death of him and the controversy that surrounds it, it's just interesting, regardless of whether you're a wrestling fan or not.
TV show.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Right. Anything further to add? I'm not sure we're rebooking much of that series, really, are we?
No. You've seen most of series 2. I haven't, so I'm interested to see how that goes. But I like their approach. I like their unique take, and they had some interesting characters speaking. So no, that was good. I would leave that as it was. Very good. Worth watching.
WrestlingRebooked@gmail.com if you want to shoot at us. Until next time.